Welcome to the Longevity Formula with Dr. Brandon Crawford. Let's explore the new era of wellness.
Hey everyone, so today we're going to dive into the faith pillar of the longevity formula. It's going to be quite exciting and how faith can really act as a catalyst for healing and recovery. I'm so excited because I get to have Kristin Hughes on this podcast today, and she is beyond an amazing individual. So let's go and get started. Let me introduce Kristin Hughes to the show. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation with you. Like to actually have the time to sit down and speak about our faith and about the journey and about where we've come from now. So thank you.
Absolutely. It's funny because, it's like, I'm excited to sit down and speak to you. It's like, what's she going to say? Because we never get to talk.
I know.
I'm like, where is she going with this? What's going on? But it's just because we're so crazy busy. We have patients all the time. We have stuff going on outside of the clinic. Yeah. So you're right.
It's always collaborative of other patients or other people, but it's never able to just have the conversation. So
absolutely. Right. Okay. So let's get to business.
Okay.
So Kristin is an occupational therapist, right? So yes. I love occupational therapy. Obviously, you know way more about that than I do. But what really got you interested in this field of study? Mm-hmm. Can you give us a little bit of background on yourself, your journey, and really how you got into that OT field?
Yes. Okay. So I would say it actually started way back when I was like 7 years old. And I actually was watching a Helen Keller movie. And when I was watching it, I remember like my heart just started to pound. And I watched the moment when Helen Keller sat there and signed water into her therapist's hand. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to see miracles like that happen. I want to be able to see somebody who is locked in, doesn't have a way to communicate, to be able to introduce them, to be able to have a voice and to be able to communicate. And I remember just looking at that TV and being like, that is what I want to do. And that is what I'm called to do. And so I originally wanted to be speech pathologist and go into speech. But then I started working with kids with autism. And in doing kids with autism, I ended up having my own business with that, doing more relationship development intervention and doing parent coaching and training the parents with autism and how to go back through development and look at how to repair the relationship with their child and how to incorporate having the relationship component within their child. And then with working with kids with autism, I started noticing, they all have a certain gait. They all have this certain pattern when they stand. And I got introduced to primitive reflexes. And when I started taking courses into primitive reflexes, I saw, wow, like every kid that I work with, they don't have any of these reflexes integrated. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know, I've always loved learning. I'm always been somebody who wants to learn and know and watch the best therapist. And so I would go with some of the kids that I would work with. I would actually go to their OT clinics with them and observe and be hands-on with them. And so I really saw OT being a huge piece for these kids with autism, for their coordination, for their movement, as a sensory component. And so then I decided I want to become an OT.
Yeah.
And so, it's cool because I was actually working at a clinic here in Austin when I met you, and you had come in talking about autism at the time.
Right, yeah.
It was during our lunch break.
I almost forgot about that.
And you came in and you actually started talking about autism. And I remember looking at you and I was like, gosh, this man is brilliant.
Oh boy.
And the way that he can look into the way that he sees the neurology and what is going on in the brain, and I could tell this within 10 minutes of you speaking. I was like, gosh, God, how cool would it be to be able to work alongside of him and be able to work with a kiddo? Or, at that time I was doing pediatric. Mm-hmm. So to be able to work with a kiddo and yet see what you're seeing going on in their brain.
Right. Yeah. It's funny you bring that up. I actually completely forgot about that. But you're right. And the practice you were working for, I mean, that was huge for them to even allow me to come in, right? Because, my primary licensure is chiropractic. And here was a group of OTs and PTs and speech therapists that when I reached out, it was cool because that office was very open.
Yes.
They're like, hey, you have new information. We want to hear it.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, man, this is a special group of people.
Yeah.
And they still are. And
Yes.
still highly respect that group.
Yes.
So it's very cool. And, you talked about some very deep things just now. I mean, your drive and your passion, I think, just got reflected. If someone didn't pick it up, then they need to go back and listen to what you just said again. Because you not only went into neurology and functional improvements, but into a deep spiritual connection, into really, really improving someone's life. I mean, if you can help, like going back to Helen Keller, right?
Yeah.
If you can help someone on that level, there's nothing better than that in the world. I mean, literally. Like
it's a high. There's a huge dopamine release that happens when you're watching somebody have that moment of putting a connection together that they did not have.
That's purpose. That's purpose, and that's huge. And I'm just curious. So within occupational therapy, right? Because I've only scratched the surface. I mean, I've read textbooks, but I haven't had formal education, all that. Do you feel like just the traditional field of OT, which I'm very appreciative of, does a good job of bridging that gap and really getting into that deep layer of connection and restoration that you just described? And I'm not saying like they're doing a good job or bad job. I'm saying like, do you think they have a good, complete answer?
A good, complete answer. I think they're trying.
Yes.
And they're trying to figure it out. So that's the beauty to me of OT is that we look at a whole person. We are not looking at only their function, but how is their function within their environment? How is their environment? How is their relationship? We can look at so many different facets of that person. And so within that, we can also look at their spiritual components, their emotional component, their well-being overall. Right. And so that is to me the beauty of OT and what kind of sets OT off from some of the other
Right. It's almost like you have more room to navigate within that field as, let's say, a physical therapist, right? Which is more looking at movement patterns, muscle tone, et cetera, right?
Correct. Yeah. But it's interesting because I was still never fully satisfied within OT looking at our outcomes. There's these things that we can do. And I also was never fully satisfied at the education component within neurology of what's actually going on within a patient. And so, yes, you can help rehab certain things, but I don't know, it just still always fell a little short for me. And so when I heard, that comes back to then when I heard you speaking and the neurology component, I was like, there's something there.
Right.
I knew there was something there. And then when I'd actually come in and I would actually start shadowing you. You became, I needed a chiropractor. You became my chiropractor while I was going through pregnancy and all of that. But then I also, we talked a lot about primitive reflexes and like collaborated some on that. And then I was really curious of like, what does your treatment actually look like? And what I was so impressed with is that you actually fuel the body. So with the red light therapy, you are actually giving the body the fuel and the energy it needed to then do the X, Y, and Z that we were trying to get a patient to do.
Right.
So we would see patients and we would see them for 45 minutes and, we had these outcomes that we wanted, but they would get really fatigued really fast.
Yeah.
Or it would take a really long time to get these outcomes. With watching you, and it just made sense to me because, we're fueling the body. And now at our center, we have so many other ways besides just the red light therapy to fuel the body.
Exactly. Yeah. So I experienced the same thing, right? So within chiropractic, right? And chiropractic is a pretty big field. I mean, it's not for me, for a lot of people, it kind of depends on where you go to school. It's not just about spinal adjustments. I mean, we learn about nutrition. We learn about, different aspects of neurology. We have a ton of anatomy. I think it's a good educational background, but there was still something missing. Same thing, right? There was something missing. And for me, it was a big component of that was the functional neurology component, but then really understanding what does it take for a cell to heal?
Yes.
And what does it take to really create sustainable change, right?
Yes.
And that's what kind of,
Yes.
that's where it's getting to what you're talking about is, we've developed these pillars, right, if you will, energy, sensory, and movement. And that's what we talk about from a clinical standpoint. And you were just describing some aspects in relation to our energy pillar, right?
Yes.
And so that's something that I will agree with you. Most providers, most therapists, especially physical therapy, OT, speech, chiro, a lot of these therapists, they're not acknowledging what the cell needs to heal.
Fuel.
Right, the fuel, right? And not even just only from a nutritional standpoint, but we have receptors and we have things like the electron transport chain, like you were talking about light therapy, that are going on that are so intimately involved with our ability to heal.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So if we're not addressing it, well, naturally we're going to come up against plateaus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's huge. And you're right. I mean, this is why we use lasers, light therapy, electrical modalities, things like the biocharger, which is amazing.
Yes.
Sound integration. Yeah.
It's huge. Like just looking at the science behind, our bodies are electrical beings. And we have to have a full battery, or at least have a battery
right.
and have some power in our battery in order to have that regeneration of new cells, right?
Absolutely.
To have a cell heal in whichever way it is. And so it's like voltage is, we have to increase voltage of our bodies to heal.
Correct.
And when you started talking about voltage, I remember when I first met you and I was just like, that's so cool, because the way that you explained it was just really cool. I don't remember the exact wording you had, but it was just talking about, we are battery packs and we need voltage in.
Right.
And so I think that's the biggest thing that really, there's many things, but that's one of the biggest things that makes us stand out.
Yes,
absolutely. Is we are filling those battery packs first and foremost. We're not just taking a patient through. I mean, we have patients that come in for 4 to 5 hours. But how and why? It's because we're fueling them.
Exactly.
We're giving their bodies energy and voltage within that to make that happen
right.
and allow it to happen. Whereas a lot of in the traditional OT, PT speech, they might do even intensives, right? But what are they doing? How are they fueling the body? How are they increasing a voltage capacity to make those neurons happen and to sustain them and to keep them?
Right.
And that to me is like the gold of what we do within it.
It lets you do so much more within a shorter period of time. In functional neurology, early in my career, I was fortunate enough to observe some of the founders of the functional neurology field, and the intensive program that was going on then. It might be 6 hours in a day, but your therapy is really going on for 1 to 2 hours because the rest of it is rest.
Right.
And they would fatigue someone, and then they'd have to go to a resting place, right? They'd go into a dark room and rest. I'm like, what is going on? And so by addressing the cellular energy component, you're really able to push someone harder. You're able to push someone longer, and you're able to create a more sustainable change faster. Yeah. And it's brilliant. I love it. And you're right, the cellular energy, the cellular voltage, right? Just to give the audience a little background, right? This was built on Dr. Jerry Tennant's work, which was built on Dr. Yakutani's work. And it's really just looking at, look, we are battery packs. We do have this energy demand in the body, right? And you can look at Dr. Becker's work as well. He wrote The Body Electric, the book. So all of that information is really where this pillar initially came from. And the great thing too is that we're not static.
No.
And even, I think you were out for maternity leave for a period of time. When you came back, you're like,
wait
a minute.
I knew it's going to be a little bit different.
Something's changed here. What's going on?
Yes.
But that's the beauty of clinical practice, especially with us, is that something is always changing because that's just natural progression. If you want to be the best,
you have to be willing to change.
Absolutely.
And this is why I love working with you, is because I've always said, like, you are like a steady ship. Like, you are focused. like within your treatment and your center and like the even the tools that you bring on for us to use, it's very focused. It's not just adding a bunch of like new and improved tools to our thing. It's focused. But if you find new research, you're texting me at midnight saying, hey, look at this new research, and we're going to make small changes or big changes, whatever it is. Right. And you're willing to be flexible within that and to shift. And it's so cool per keeping up with the most current research of what you're seeing.
For sure.
Within it.
Yeah, you just told on me because I just spoke for about an hour and a half about circadian biology. And
not at midnight. Okay, so it would be like at 6 o'clock during the day because we don't look at our phones after 6 o'ck.
Exactly.
Once the sun
that's
goes
not
down,
happening.
right?
We're not on the computer after the sun goes down. Not going to happen ever. I'm not researching at night.
That's what I'm trying to get off of.
Okay. So, gosh, we could continue to go in that direction for so long. But so we kind of got into, the intro to you, occupational therapy, et cetera, and really what kind of attracted you to this style of practice. But there's another component to you, just because I do know you and your background, your family and everything. But I find it interesting. I love your mom.
Yeah.
Right. How did your childhood really fuel your place and how your mom raised you guys and that type of thing?
Man, okay, so my mom ended up pretty much healing herself. She had thyroid cancer. They gave her like less than a year to live, and she was not having it and completely like healed herself. Mm-hmm. And she healed herself via going completely all natural in our products. And this is like a long time ago. So within like shampoo, face products, like our house went all natural, and they did not have good smelling things back then.
Right.
Like it wasn't fun for me, and even food, we had a garden. We were fortunate enough to grow up on 5 acres, and we had a garden. My mom did not let us watch TV. She would always send us outside. She already had things to block our house from EMFs. We actually had an ozone machine. So as interesting, the first time I walked into your house, I remember, and I had not smelled ozone since I was like probably 16. And I was like, I smell ozone.
Right. Yeah.
Because that is how all these biohackers and all the new trends that are coming up. I'm like, my mom was so far ahead of her time. She was doing all of these things.
Right. She didn't have the internet to search.
No, she didn't.
It's just amazing. I remember talking to her. And I was talking about like something like vitamin A or something. And she starts regurgitating information.
Yes.
And I'm like, no one has ever known this, let alone be able to recite to me more than what I know.
Yeah.
I was just so blown away. I was like, holy smokes.
Yeah.
But it's quite amazing. And it really set you up for a type of mindset, which is another pillar in the longevity formula, to be able to make that, I guess you would call it transition from more traditional practice into this style, which we're defining.
I was going to say, what would you call it? It's not only just holistic, because it's also extremely scientific,
right?
And per research,
exactly.
So, what would you define it as?
It is interesting. Well, so it's neurological and biological restoration, right?
Yeah.
And that it's a all-encompassing approach that, or for what we know, I mean, we try to be as all-encompassing as we possibly can be, that, really tries to touch on every aspect of healing that we've really been able to define as, I don't want to say important, but vital. And, that really kind of goes into this concept of faith, right?
Yeah.
Which is the foundational pillar of what I'm calling the longevity formula. And in our office, it's not uncommon for you to walk in and for you to see Kristin, Amy, or Julie praying with a patient.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens often. And, you'll just be walking around, you look over in the corner and you'll see whether all 3 of them or one of them or whatever, really engaging with prayer with a patient that they're struggling, or maybe it's not the patient, maybe it's the caregiver, and they acknowledge the needs and they go, look, something needs to be done here. They need help. They're hurt. So, I mean, can you talk about that a little bit?
That's something that I am so incredibly grateful for, and I don't take for granted, is the ability that you've given us freedom to bring faith into the center. And that's from day one. And we didn't even get to talk about how you open the center and all of that and and watching that unfold. But you have given us freedom to have faith and to be able to speak freely about faith. And it's interesting too, people walk into the doors and they always talk about neurosolutions and how it's different and how there's a feeling and how you can feel love or you can feel, and it's interesting because you're like, it is because we have prayed in that building. We have prayed over each room. We have prayed over each door.
Right.
We have prayed for when people walk into our building that they can feel God's presence. And it's multiple people within the center that have done that. I know that you and Sarah have done that. I don't know if you know, but we have done that through your buildings, and we have done it continuously. And I've had sessions where I'm sitting there and I have somebody with a stem pod and they're underneath the red light panel and we have music going. So for me, like when I'm with a patient, the reason why I'm like there every day with them and get up and do it and, is because I love getting to the heart of what's going on in a patient.
Right.
And so it's hard to be with me as one-on-one as a clinician and not be able to just stay really shallow. And to not really talk about what is going on in a spiritual level and emotional level. And so I've had all this stuff going on with the patients and we're doing treatment and then we're talking and we just start praying over them. And I even will have them pray.
Yeah.
And speak it out loud.
Absolutely.
For their own healing.
Yeah.
And that's also always with discretion, but it's remarkable because God's presence is there. We've called it into being there.
Absolutely. You're right. I mean, I feel like, well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that everyone has a faith, whether they acknowledge it or not, right? Yeah. Statistically, very, very few people are truly agnostic. And what I want people to understand is that this is a foundation.
Yeah.
No matter what. Like this has to be your foundation. And what I always want to communicate, and I did this whenever we were shooting we had a lot of recording going on in the office, and everyone was just on this buzz, this high, we are awesome. Yeah, look, everyone's wanting to see what we're doing, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And pull everyone in and say, listen, yes, we're awesome, but healing comes from God. We are vessels.
Yeah.
And if we get away from that, everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that.
Yes.
Truly, truly believe that. And you're right. Whenever you're working with someone and you're truly working with someone, not going through the motions, really connecting with someone, you get into that mindset of, God, what am I missing? God, what does this patient need? And you just kind of get entranced, in this entrenched. And you start really, it's like, for me, it's like this ongoing prayer of I'm working, whether maybe I'm just working on a primitive reflex in the hand, whatever it may be.
But that's still,
right. I'm sitting there like, God, integrate this reflex. What part of the brain am I working on here? How can, give me wisdom, give the patient wisdom.
There's intention behind what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so stinking exhausting as well.
It is exhausting. It is exhausting because every moment I need to be present.
Right.
And I know when I'm not. And that is my goal, is to be present with each patient. And also, we're treating patients that, some of our patients have been resuscitated. Some, a majority of our patients have died and been brought back. We're treating patients that aren't moving. We're treating patients that are locked in. We're treating patients that have gone through severe traumatic events in the families. And so it's like each person that comes in our door, you want to be so present because you want to see results. Miracles are now expected results.
Exactly.
And that is what we expect.
Yes.
And that is what I'm looking for. Otherwise, I don't want to do it.
Exactly.
I don't want to waste this much energy, and I don't want to be going home so tired without seeing those results. And so, when I see a patient, I'm looking at them from where I want them to be, or where the patients want them to see, or where the parents want them to be. I'm looking at that patient that's not walking, and I'm seeing them walk.
Yes.
And so while you're sitting there, even if it's just, using my hands or the Resimax or a stem pod and our tools, it's like this, I'm firing these neurons, I'm putting together these muscles, we're rebuilding the brain, and it might be little baby steps, but that is my end goal when I'm with them.
Absolutely. And if you can't see that, then the patient can't see that.
Yeah.
And sometimes you see it first as a provider.
Yeah.
And you have to be that sounding board and that inspiration for the patient because they may be in complete despair. Yeah. Most of them are. That we work with. Yeah. They don't even think it's possible.
Yeah.
But once you acknowledge that we're really not in control, we're just here doing our best, taking the directive, doing what we can, then it becomes more freeing. And you have more room to really navigate. Yes. And it's okay to pray for big things.
Yeah.
In fact, you should. I mean, if you have a big God, you should pray for big things. So why just pray for small changes? Pray for big changes. Yeah. Expect big changes. They can happen.
Yeah. It's crazy because I don't share this often. This is like, but when I'm at church and there's praise and worship, I am sitting there and I'm praying and I'm worshiping and I'm crying before the Lord for the loved ones or for the patients that come in. Mm-hmm. And it's for me, and it's actually visualizing them of doing these things that we want them to be able to do.
Yes.
Or for these families to have a peace, right? That surpasses all understanding, or for these families to be able to have wisdom and navigation of where to go next.
Right.
And it's beautiful too, because like as a clinician, you hear these stories day in and day out that are heartbreaking and can completely weigh you down, but it's not yours.
Yeah.
It's God's. Mm-hmm. You know that you're here, like helping them. You're not even helping, but you're there as part of the vessel, right? To facilitate healing.
Yeah. But that's it.
Yeah,
totally.
And you've come in and you've taken the best, like you have dedicated your life to researching and to coming up with the best strategies for healing. But so it's not like it's just this prayer. We're not going to just go pray over you and expect you to be healed when you walk through our doors.
Yes.
It's very still extremely based. So it's almost like not even just the foundation. It's like your house is built on the rock. Mm-hmm. And then there's the foundation of the science and all your other pillars.
Right. Well, and that's
but the faith is the thing that's holding that foundation for us.
Correct. 100%. And that's why faith is the foundation, but then science is at the top, right? And I think that God gave us the ability to navigate through science to develop some of the tools and strategies that we have. Yeah. We shouldn't take science and replace God with it because that doesn't work. Even people like Stephen Hawking have acknowledged, before he died, that there has to be a God, otherwise this doesn't work.
Yeah.
So there's so many different ways to really navigate this and think through it. But you're right. I mean, ultimately, we are just here. We're energetic beings, and we don't have magical powers, whether you think you do or not. No. And it's just like...
But we do have the ability to be present.
Absolutely. And we have gifts.
And within that, I think, yes. And within that, I think that is magical.
Yes.
And that is magical powers.
I like that.
If you can bring presence and you can bring your gift and you can walk in your gift and walk in that.
That's awesome. Absolutely. And what you just described is, when we talk about goal setting, right? Because we're big on goal settings.
Always.
It's not just about, here's the goal, right? It's about, okay, this is the goal, this is where we want to get, but then how do we fill in the gap, right? And that can be led by faith, that can be led by science, that can be led by so many things, but we have to fill in that gap. And you also have to be willing to be fluid within that navigation, right? Because there are times when we're working with a patient and we may get this gut feeling.
Yeah.
I don't know where this is coming from. I don't know how this makes sense. But let's do this.
Yeah.
And I believe that you're going to get that moment if you're open and you're saying, okay, God, how do I heal this patient? Yeah. You're going to be more receptive to that. I mean, you experience these things, right?
All the time.
And there's no other way to really describe it because more often than not, those things work.
Yeah.
which is really cool.
Or they it's not even like working for the outcome that you wanted, but who knows, like the parents were like wanting that.
Right.
And you're like, oh, well, there you go.
Absolutely. Faith has been integral to how we've gotten to where we've gotten. You had faith to leave a traditional model.
Yeah, I had to completely step out of the box of OT and do something completely different that I've never seen done before.
Mm-hmm. And you did it pretty unwavering. I remember it was like, hey, here's an idea. And you're like, I remember, I'll pray about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you said.
Yeah.
And you came back, okay, let's do it. And it was like, wow, decision made.
Yeah.
It's like, that's faith.
Yeah.
That's been amazing. Same thing, for me. Just going out and, early in my career, we had a few practices under our belt. We had got to a certain place and stress had just taken me down. It was hard. Mm-hmm. Really, it was insurance-based things. It was a hustle, bustle. It was hard. But God was really weighing on me. Sell it. Get out. You're done for this. Like he was closing a chapter.
Yeah.
And I was like, but I've only been practicing for a few years. What's going on?
And you had kids?
Had kids. Yeah.
Right?
Couldn't play with them. I was too
young.
tired. Yeah, exactly. And we prayed about it, my wife and I. And we both separately, and we both came to the conclusion, let's sell. And we sold everything. We moved to Costa Rica. And the cool thing about Costa Rica is I really thought I was going to have the next big business idea. I was going to come up with a great clinical something or whatever. I was like, I'm going to change the world in Costa Rica. But God walked me through Exodus.
Yeah.
That's what happened in Costa Rica. That was it. But that's what I needed. He had to take me out of the daily grind. He had to put me into the jungle, which, by the way, also reset my circadian cycles, right? And he just hit me in the head and said, this is what is important. Mm-hmm. And that was it. It was Exodus. That was it. He said, this is enough. Mm-hmm. This is enough. And don't forget it. That's what I can never do it without crying. But that's what I got out of that.
Yeah.
And when I came back, it's like, whoa, okay. Well, now what?
You were practicing out of your house.
Yeah.
Just a few patients. It was.
That was the thing. I came back and it's like, okay, God, now what? Well, guess what? Patients started reaching out out of nowhere. And I'm like, well, shoot.
It happened.
Okay, so started seeing people out of my house. Had to get a space in an office. Had to start subleasing. Started seeing, being more diagnostics and then turning into more therapy and then all these things, right? And it's just like, holy smokes, this has not been me. Yeah. This has been God going, just do what I tell you to do. Yeah. I'll take care of the rest. Yeah. And that's been so amazing. And that's a good message for everyone. It's like, look, if you want an answer, pray about it. You may not get it immediately, but you'll get it, right? It may not be an audible message in your head, but you'll get it and you'll know when you get it. Yeah. And when you get it, listen.
Just listen and do it.
Right.
Just walk in it.
No matter how scary.
That goes back during COVID 2020 is when you actually opened the doors of his office. It was the week that everything was shutting down.
Oh, yeah.
Everything was shutting down. We didn't even know if we were allowed to drive. Right. And I remember, we were like, do we need to get, notes that we are, your chiropractor and that? And you looked at me and you're like, God told me to open this practice on this date.
Yeah. That was crazy. I mean, but truly, it was like, I was scared.
No, you were, but there was still underlying piece though. Cause you knew that God told you to open.
I'll restate it.
I saw it.
It was scary.
Yes.
But you're right.
Yes.
The core was like, okay, no, this is what's supposed to happen. And once COVID, really flared up, whatever you want to call it, I did get a letter from the state board. I thought all the doctors in the area got it, but it basically said, we need you to stay open. You're treating, these types of conditions and things that we need you to stay open for, and we need you to be a potential triage unit and all this kind of stuff. So I'm like, great. And so we continued to operate. And, they gave parameters and we stayed within those parameters and all that. But God, we had the most exponential growth through that year.
So much. And I remember looking at you and I said, it might look different than what you expected, but it's going to work. Right. And I think it is different than what your initial thought was as far as clientele. Yeah. And
absolutely.
And how the office was going to explode.
Right.
I mean, we went to like a 2-year wait list quickly.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it's wild because it was just walking in faith.
Right.
Doing what you knew God told you to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Fun times, man. Didn't expect to go into those tangents, but that's good. That's good. I hope the audience appreciates that.
Yeah.
So we've talked about like some clinical care, patient care, and so on. But I mean, this so applies to caregivers. I mean, we've kind of touched on how it applies to us as clinicians.
Yeah.
But I mean, do you have any messages or anything you want to give to caregivers?
Okay, so can we go back to my mom?
Absolutely.
So my mom, to this day, I have given her a care plan, like a home care plan. She does it religiously. She has her laser. She has her stem pod.
Mm-hmm.
She has her Fisher-Wallace. And she has all these things that she's doing. But I've always told her she's given us the gift of her health. Like by her taking care of herself, she has given us the gift of her health.
Right.
And so, as a mom myself, and, I want to also give my kids the gift of my health. And so for caregivers, going through the stress, I always say if we can equip our bodies to handle stress more efficiently, you can't get rid of stress, but if we can equip our bodies to handle stress, that's the goal.
Right.
And so as caregivers, finding those ways to help your own body being able to handle stress, whether it's vagal and doing vagal exercises, or if it's, having time where you're going and you're having movement, if it's movement that you enjoy. So it might be going on walks. It might just be throwing on music and dancing and having a dance party with your family or your kids or by yourself, but doing movement that you enjoy. And then also having time of prayer and meditation. And for me, it's prayer and meditation time is important, but it's also just through the day.
Yeah.
Like when I'm driving, that's my prayer time. When I'm in the shower, that's my prayer time. So I have certain times that are my prayer time, but it might be while I'm still doing things.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Totally the same way.
So it becomes
Absolutely.
like a flow instead of just a time, a prayer.
It's a constant communication.
It's constant. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
So when you say vagal, right? So vagus nerve stimulus, do you have any specific ways or favorites that you'd like to talk about?
Okay. So my favorite way is actually, I've been doing like just even putting my face in cold water. So like cold exposure.
Yeah.
Deep breathing. We use a tool called the ResiMax. It's a vibration tool. And I used to carry that. I have one and I used to carry it around in my car and I would just even put it over my belly. Right. So vibration, warmth on your gut, on your belly, and the only time I could have was in the car. So using that. If you have a stem pod, then using the stem pod on your symbicontra in your ear and activating your vagus nerve. It could just be gargling. It could be humming.
Right.
It can be having times of deep prayer and meditation.
Absolutely.
And then also going outside barefoot
right.
and grounding and having time outside.
Yes. So when you look at the brain waves in the brain, right, alpha waves typically correlate with vagus nerve activation, and that should be kind of our resting state, brainwave state, right? We're ready to ramp up into beta, downregulate into theta, whatever, right?
Yes.
But most of us have this flipped alpha rhythm that we see clinically. And it's interesting, when you're on the beach, those waves rolling in are typically in an alpha wave rhythm.
Yeah.
When you're in nature, there's a lot of alpha and theta waves being produced in nature. You can actually see a brain be entrained in both of those scenarios. And so it's important to acknowledge what they call it, forest bathing right? Walking outside, being in nature, listening to the sounds, being grounded to the earth, taking in the visual sights, the smells, all those things can actually activate the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
Breathing, yes. So when we breathe, just to clarify, it's more so activating the vagus nerve if you breathe out more than in. So exhalation is where you get more of that vagus nerve activation. So I usually tell people breathe in, then breathe out for about twice as long as you breathe in. Very simple strategy. There's tons of ways that you can go through breath work. But also important and just very beneficial for overall health, mental status. Because you're right, if you're caring for someone, even if you're not caring for someone that's injured, but just raising children.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I read something, it was like, 1 kid is like raising 1 kid, 2 kids is like raising 15 kids, and raising 3 kids is like raising 15,000 kids, 2 cows, and a donkey, right? During a hurricane.
Yeah.
And so, that can be stress in and of itself.
Yeah.
And so just taking care of yourself so that these kids aren't perfect. They're not going to be. We shouldn't expect them to be. So that when they go through those moments, when you want to really discipline them or whatever, it's like, okay, I'm cool, calm, and collected. I can really handle this in a way where this can be a teaching moment. Like those things matter.
Yes.
And those have long-term implications for mental health for kids, developmental roles, parenting roles, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
So just trying to say there's far-reaching implications for everything that you just said. And it's not flippant. It should be really understood and exercised by everyone, right? Yeah. So I think something else is really finding something that you enjoy, right? Mm-hmm. I know academically, and of course, I'm the one that started stemming the Symbicontia with the SymPod. I was the one that said, hey, pulse radio frequency, auricular branch of the vagus nerve, let's do it. And now there's, studies going on because of our work with it, but I don't like it. I don't like doing it. And so I'm like, shoot, I know this is good for me, but I find myself not doing it. I like breath work. I like cold plunges. Mm-hmm. I love running. I love hiking. So those are ways that I find myself more so stimulating my vagal system just because I enjoy them more. Yeah. So really finding something that you enjoy because you start to eliminate barriers to that something, I think is something else for people to really understand. So just another thing, you practice what you preach. Whenever I come into the practice, it is not uncommon to see Kristin sitting with, she's got a Neo rhythm on. She's got
I'm treating myself.
Microcurrent going. She's got a stem pod in your ear. She's got lasers going. And she'll be walking around treating people with some of this stuff too, right? She practices what she preaches. She's the real deal. Yeah. So is there anything else that you think our listeners need to know or be aware of? Is there anything else that you'd like to share in regards to whether it's faith or anything that you want to talk about?
No, I love this, that we were able to bring in the faith component, because I do feel like there's going to be a lot of neurology components and science components, but faith really is a huge component that I don't think is always talked about as much within the center, but it's still like the underlying factor within it.
It's the factor.
It is the factor.
It's the X factor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, if you know someone that could really benefit from this information, whether it's a family member, a friend, anyone, we're here. We're doing this to help people. That's it. So if you could please send this information to them. We want to help people that are struggling. We want to help people thrive, right? Yeah. So it's not just about those in severely injured states or whatever. We want to help the parent. We want to help the caregiver. We want to help the children. Yeah. So please share this information so that we truly can really see our mission in motion, which is to change global healthcare. So thank you again for listening. Thank you for joining us, Kristin. I really appreciate you. And thanks for making this world a better place.
Yeah, thank you.
We hope today's episode has inspired you to take that next step toward your best self. Remember, the path to longevity is paved with small, daily decisions. Your journey is unique, and every step, every choice, brings you closer to your ultimate vision of a healthier, happier life. For more insights, tips, and resources, visit drbrandoncrawford.com.